Good morning, everybody. I think we've still got a few people dribbling in, so we'll just give it another minute or so while everyone gets here. Good program this morning. Really pleased to have our speakers here today, talking about hybrid working. I'm at home today, so I'm hybrid working myself. I'm sitting here looking out at the rain, so I'm quite glad I'm at home. So I hope everyone's comfy and warm when they are, and we'll get started in just a minute. Before we go to our first speaker, we have a bit of a breaking news update on ESOS. So if any of you are registered for ESOS, then I shall hand you over to Wendy, who's going to tell you the latest.
Thanks, Duncan. And I'm just going to flash my screen up. And this really is breaking news here. I hope you can see that. ESOS Phase 3, we thought it was all going to end in June. But as many of us know, there's been some substantive changes so close to the end and really not as best defined as they could be, that this is a statement that's come out just yesterday in a newsletter. You might have seen already that the portal that we've all been waiting for to submit our data onto is going to open in a couple of days' time, but it looks as though it's not going to be quite ready to put all your data on there. But here's the biggie here, that no enforcement action is going to be taken if you submit all your data by the 6th of August. Remember, it was the 5th of June previously, so it almost looks de facto as though the date really for compliance by any other name is now in August. A lot has changed there and it's a little bit frustrating, but there seems to be a little bit more time available. You still do need to register your details there on that portal, so make sure you do that. If you do want a bit more information about what's gone on with ESOS over recent times, just flash this up. There's a couple of videos. Probably the one on the left, sorry, we've just rushed this out this morning. The one on the left of the screen is the more recent of the two and explains what happened in that 2-hour-long webinar that the EA did. So please do take a quick snap of those. Obviously these will be on the video as well later for you to see, and we'll post some links in there for you to catch up on what has happened. Yes, so we've got that final day up now in August for ESOS. So thank you, Duncan, for just giving me a few moments to let you know what's going on there. Thank you.
No worries, thank you very much. A couple of other bits of housekeeping before we start. Oh, my slide's going to not advance now. Go on. So a couple of events coming up next month. We'll be having an event on energy efficiency. So that booking is now live. So do come along to that one, again, online on Teams. And we'll look at some new technologies and behavior change and some principles about reducing your energy consumption, which is obviously really important alongside buying your renewable energy, and definitely before you start doing things like offsetting. And then in the summer, we're actually doing an in-person event. We'll be visiting University of Winchester, where they've done a load of work over the last year on additional solar and particularly on large-scale air source heat pump installation across many of their buildings and halls of residence. So we'll go and have a look at some of that and actually sort of see the installations in place and stand next to one and hear it. And, you know, people will tell you they're really noisy and actually go and stand next to it, and they're not making that much noise at all. So if you can join us in person, that should be first week in July. We're just waiting on their events team to confirm what other events they've got on at the time, so we can pin down that date. But we'll get that out to you as soon as we know when it is. As I mentioned, we're recording this event. We record all our online events. So all of those previous recordings, if you've missed anything and you want to recap, they're all available on the Carbon Academy web pages. So it's just a big list of all the events, and the slide decks and the recordings are all there, so you can go and recap. And that's where the recording of this event will be after today. And then feedback, obviously we love to get your feedback. You know, how we've done, is the time of the session right, is the length of the session right, are there any topics you want us to cover, would you like to speak at an event in the future? So if you get your phone out and scan the QR code, and Wendy will pop the link in the chat. And yeah, if we can get your feedback as you go, that's really helpful. It's much easier for you if you pop your feedback down at the time so that you remember it. So I'll leave that up there for a minute or so, just while you grab your phones and get that link up. And also, I said we mentioned we're doing questions after each speaker. We've taken the questions in the chat, so any questions that pop up, chuck them in there, and we'll relay them to the speakers as we go. Okay, I think that's me done. Hopefully that's been there long enough, and you've got the link in the chat. So I'll hand over to Cara.
Perfect. Thanks, Duncan. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. I'm going to start off by talking about the social value of hybrid working, which I know under the Carbon Academy might seem a bit left field, but hopefully by the end of the session, you will understand a little bit why this topic I think is quite useful in this space. So first off, a little bit about me and a little bit about my business. So I work at Ridge & Partners. We're a built environment consultancy. We work nationally and internationally on buildings of all kinds in all sorts of states and with all different kinds of clients. So we've been working with kind of the output of COVID and this hybrid working shift of where people are operating most of their time in quite interesting ways. I do have a carbon accounting sort of background, so I'm not here just completely out of the blue, but I've since then moved into the social value space, and there are some fantastic opportunities to learn from both in each other. So I'm hoping that this will be a good start for you guys on that. So to start off with, what is social value? Well, there's actually no single definition that's agreed upon entirely, but there are groups of people internationally, nationally, that have their own definitions. So Social Value International, the pinnacle of those kind of groups of experts, define social value essentially in relation to the importance people place on changes to their well-being, and make it all about kind of making decisions in a really thoughtful and positive way. This is a fantastic definition, I think, because social value is intentionally vague, it's intentionally flexible so that it can suit local circumstances. At no point should you be thinking, you have to stick really regimentedly to this specific definition. It's all about making sure that you're applying it as is relevant in your circumstances. So in this case, in your office space or in the area that you're working in, and how that has had to shift since COVID has started. So here I've just highlighted those particularly interesting bits. So for me, it's the relative importance, i.e. what people think of their experience change. And then in terms of their well-being, it's well-being in its broadest definition. So we're not just talking about kind of the health and well-being, mental health sort of space. We're really broadening that beyond to kind of everything a person experiences that impacts their well-being. And ultimately, as I said, it's about making better decisions. It's about informing decision making so that it's holistic and really captures all of the change that we're going to make. So how does this relate to hybrid working? Well, first of all, there's that change aspect. Obviously, we've gone through a lot of that in the last few years. The well-being aspect, again, a lot of us are very familiar with how different pressures have moved since working environments have changed so much. And then fundamentally, decision making. In this time, a lot of people had to make kind of immediate crisis decisions almost during the COVID pandemic. And now we're getting to a point where people are having to make long-term decisions to either revert, retain, or adjust whatever processes were in place ahead of time. So it really is kind of bringing all of those elements of social value together in terms of how we move forward as a business, as an office, as a nation in terms of our working culture. Social Value International has these principles of social value, and they are designed to inform and support the achievement of social value. There are a few of these that I'm going to pull out that I think are particularly relevant to how we can improve our understanding and our addressing of hybrid working. So those ones that I want to pull out specifically are: the first one, involve stakeholders, and then 2, understanding what changes, valuing the things that matter, being transparent, and I'll explain about that before, and my personal favorite, be responsive. So what do we mean by that? Well, first off, involving stakeholders, we mean finding out what's possible from the people in your offices, but also from your landlord, from your facilities manager, from anybody who has any level of control or capacity in your space. And it's really important to ask your teams what they want and mean it. A lot of people I've seen have, sent out these surveys and said, do you want to work in this way or that way? And then ultimately people feel like they get ignored, and that's never going to be a good thing for team morale. But we need to understand what people are driving towards, whether that's additional aspects of in-office support, or again this move to hybrid working, which I think is definitely something we're seeing a lot of. 2, understanding what changes. So whatever you do think in terms of what's possible and what's been requested by your space users, think about what change that will create, not only to the people who've asked for it or perhaps the people using your office. What will the change be to perhaps other people using your office building if there's one space that is particularly empty or particularly busy? It's important at this point to consider things in a relatively broad circumstance. And then 3, valuing the things that matter. So once we understand what that holistic value will be, what do people actually value the most? And how does that compare to what it is going to cost your business in terms of creating that change? Although social value is about creating this, positive impact, ultimately, a lot of us businesses, we live in a capital world. We have to understand how this is going to balance out with the costs, and then use that to do kind of a broad value analysis to understand what is going to be actually achievable and valuable to your teams in terms of cost and also impact. And then be transparent. So linking back to that involving people in the first instance, what's possible and what people want is not always going to be what's actually achievable. But make sure you're open about the limitations, timeframes, and expectations. If people are involved and if people are informed, they're much less likely to be discouraged if things don't perhaps go exactly how they'd be hoping, which, let's be honest, is rare in this life. And then finally, be responsive. Ultimately, actions speak louder than words, as we all know. This quote I did find was attributed to Mark Twain, but I couldn't find the source, so I didn't want to source it, but I thought it was a great quote, so I've included it anyway. Fundamentally, again, we want to be taking action, we want to be talking about it and listening to our employees. I mean, even attending this webinar is something that's a really good step in the right direction, but ultimately, all of that doesn't mean anything if you don't do anything with the information, if you don't make any sort of changes, even if that change is just an increased level of communication about why you can't move to a more or less hybrid model, why you can't do this or that with your space. So hopefully that's given you a few tools to kind of understand how you can use social value to best make the decisions about how you're going to adjust to hybrid working. But, I'm going to give you a few things of what this looks like in practice. First of all, from a people perspective, how we make sure our teams stay engaged and stay informed and involved, keeping that kind of office culture that's so important these days. Well, first off, I would highly encourage anybody who is working outside of office hours to work offline. There are buttons in Teams and in Microsoft Outlook that essentially turn you offline so that any messages or emails you send do not get put out until you then turn it back online. It's kind of similar to scheduling. This is important because when people receive things out of office hours, it can often put an expectation on people that they then need to also be working out of hours. And while flexible working is great and being able to adjust when your working hours are is fantastic, we don't want to be putting undue stress on other people. Equally, it's really important to call out overworking. If you're seeing people online at silly times of the day, and if you're seeing that regularly, it's important that we say to each other that it's not good for that individual or indeed for the business to be working at that kind of level. Making sure that part of that culture is that we all protect each other and support each other to take that break and switch off at the end of the day, particularly when we're not in an office and people aren't physically leaving a space. Another thing that's really important, especially when we move further away from kind of a core office environment, is to schedule in-work socials. So again, if people are already feeling that pressure to stay on an extra hour or two, or to keep the laptop on in case an email comes in, if you schedule out of work socials, which can be good, people will essentially say, well, if I'm going to be spending that time with my colleagues, I might as well spend it working. If you schedule it in the office or in office hours, what that does is informs people that actually their well-being is important to the company, and that time for socialization and team bonding is something that company understands is valuable, and that is really important, again, in helping people feel empowered to make positive choices for their individual well-being. And then finally, it's really important to leverage impact groups, especially when we're all so disparate and not being in a core office place. People will share various characteristics, protected or otherwise, various interests, and by having groups, whether that's specifically diversity and inclusion groups, or whether that's just groups of people that share similar hobbies and happen to get together to do those hobbies periodically, really leveraging those and making sure we're celebrating that can make a really big difference when people are more physically isolated. And then in terms of environmentally, what this can look like, first off, as a lot of people will know, you can reduce your office space, but with leases, with landlords and various things, this isn't always possible. And where it's not, a really good alternative to that is to change the space use. So you can move it from desks to more kind of collaborative spaces. They don't need as much heating. They won't use as much in terms of IT equipment and that sort of thing. So changing that office space can not only save you money and improve your environmental performance, it can also actually open out opportunities for you guys to improve that kind of team working when people are in the office space. It's also important to leverage your building controls. So making sure you understand what you can and can't adjust within your space, which is going to vary depending on the type of building, the type of contract of your lease, or whether you own the building. And then through that, understanding what opportunities there are to reduce consumption of energy, but also to kind of maximize that efficiency piece. But it's not all just about what we can do physically, it's also about behaviors. So particularly when people are out of the office, it's making sure people are reminded and encouraged to fully turn their laptops off, not just close the screen and leave it on standby all evening. Making sure people understand that it's not just the laptops, in fact, if they've got, and hopefully they do, the full setup, that they can turn off the screens and all these kind of extra things that were just adding little bits to their home energy bills. So behaviors and kind of encouraging people to translate any environmentally friendly things they would do in the office to what they would do at home as well. And then finally, incentives. So incentivizing people to potentially travel to and from the offices in a different way, particularly if they're doing it less frequently. Maybe they're able to take a bus now instead of driving, or take the train, or maybe even walk a portion of the way if they're not doing it as regularly. Or in some cases, it may even be suitable to add to your benefit system of something that encourages people to get green tariffs, as it were, renewable energy opportunities for their home environment. So there's all kinds of different ways that we can influence not just the space, but the people and their use of the space, both in the office and at home. So in summary, I just wanted to pull up those principles again, because I do think they're incredibly valuable. I want to make sure that the key messages people hear are that to use social value to understand how to create change that's positive for people, we need to be focusing on that change. We're all dealing with this kind of fallout together. We need to understand what it is that's changing already and how we can influence that change in the direction we want to see. It's so important to listen to people. It doesn't really make any difference if we're having all these brilliant green initiatives and fantastic stuff if we're alienating our people anyway. So we must make sure we listen and engage with our people. And again, that take action, that principle 8, be responsive. Think about the change, listen to what people want, and then do something about it. And also fundamentally, all of our spaces, all of our businesses, all of our people are going to be massively different. We need to understand that and leverage that for the benefit that it can deliver us. Thank you very much. That is me.
Thank you, Cara. No, that's really good. So as I said, yes, you can pop your questions in the chat. So just while people are thinking up their questions, I had a couple of things I was interested in. Just right at the beginning, you talked about relative importance. And I just wondered if you could sort of expand on that a bit. And do you mean the relative importance people put on different types of well-being, whether that's family time versus workspace? Or are you talking about the relative importance they put on well-being versus pay or other aspects of their working life, or all of it? Just can you expand a bit?
Absolutely. So, kind of all of the above. The relative importance piece really speaks to what individuals value the most. And that could be to do with which elements of well-being they're prioritizing, or it could be to do with, well, actually, I'd be more inclined to go into the office if there were 2 screens at my desk, because that actually really improves my working experience. Whereas if I go into an office and there's only 1 screen, that's going to detract me. It's also thinking, well, which changes are we making are going to be more valuable to the people that we're speaking to. Basically, it's all about understanding what matters to people, which is incredibly vague and incredibly broad, but really important to know before we do any big changes in this space.
Okay, thanks. And on the bit about, so asking people what they want, a lot of people, if you ask people what they want, what they'll probably come up with is something really mundane, because they don't know what's possible. So yeah, there must be a feedback process. How do you elicit people what they really want, but they don't know they want to ask for it, or they wouldn't dream of asking for it because they don't think it's possible? So is that a sort of a multi-stage process?
Yeah, I think it's important to know kind of what your audience is, because if you know that your audience particularly is going to be a bit more reserved or a bit less kind of innovative, then yeah, you might want to put in there some kind of really out of the blue options just to get people thinking out of the box. It is all about, again, kind of making sure it's relevant to who your audience is. If you've got a small team, it can be really collaborative straight out of the bat. But if you've got a bigger team, it might be a bit harder with all those voices, and you might need to make it more of a kind of systematic, iterative process.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, Wendy, I think you've got your hand up.
I know there's another one after me. This is from one that's been submitted or emailed across to me, actually, anonymously, which is about how you manage the lone worker situation. And I think what's being referred to here, so many of us, because of the demographics these days, live alone. And we have a situation that if you're doing a high percentage of work from home, you've got people obviously in quite solitary situations, and perhaps some of the mental health issues that may go undiscovered, that we need to very carefully keep an eye on. So really it's the keeping in touch issues when you have so many lone workers.
No, absolutely. And I think, Ridge has invested a lot, particularly recently, in this space. We have an employee experience lead who leads all of our wellbeing aspects. And that I've worked alongside with her to put things together like Lighthouse Construction Charity Partnership that we've now got, which encourages people to be able to access that locally. But also it's about how we understand our teams. In Ridge, the majority of our teams are 10 people or fewer, which really enables us to have that core kind of connected group of people looking out for each other, and that's so important for us and for kind of spotting those things. No, it's absolutely something we're aware of and figuring out along with other people, I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, just at Carbon Footprint, we have a thing we call the morning huddle that we started actually during COVID. So we get online at 9:30 just for 10 minutes, and it allows us to see obviously what everyone's working at on, and it allows us to see how folks are. And it's just that being proactive with line managers, just noticing if someone is a little bit off and is maybe working from home for reasons that are not to do with all the other reasons we talked about here, that could be hiding something much bigger.
Absolutely.
That we need to be proactive about.
Absolutely,
yes. It's an area that seems to have become much more aware recently, particularly with young people and new starters in an organisation, where they may have relocated and come to an area where they're hybrid working. And if they're working from home a lot, they're not making the new friends that they would expect to if they were working, continuously in the office. So yeah, somebody online is just talking about their daily scrum, which is a little bit rigorous, but keeps you going. We had a question in from Beth asking about whether you knew any examples of the sort of rearranged office and collaborative working spaces. If there's anybody who's done it really well, or anybody who could offer advice on how to do it.
I don't actually have to mind any examples of rearranged space, but where we've been expanding quite a lot as a business, we've been moving into new offices, and it's been a really big focus to make sure that those spaces are kind of spread throughout the office. So it's not just one hub of people, because that can quite often make people feel kind of strange about using those spaces. They feel immediately very kind of isolated in that space that's supposed to be collaborative, and making sure that there's different types of space available. So there are those sofas and kind of open talking spaces, but there are also conference tables out in the open where teams can get together, and formal and informal spaces that are available generally. So again, I think it's not, unfortunately, back to this, it's all about your specific circumstances and understanding what people want and what's possible in the space, and then leveraging that to the best that you can. Fundamentally, one of the tenets of social value is that you speak to people and understand what matters to them, and that will ensure you have a positive and functional rearranging of your space, because people will use it because they want it.
Right, we better move on. Thank you very much, Cara. That was really good. And thank you for the questions, everyone. So if Joel, if you can grab the screen, I shall hand over to you.
Okay, so my name's Joel and I work for Carbon Footprint as the Technical Innovations Manager. So effectively what we're going to talk about here is how to calculate your carbon footprint of home working, and also in some respects commuting, because these two things are a little bit linked. I did a similar presentation about 4 years ago, and you might remember that. So that was just right at the start of COVID. I figured out, oh, yes, we're working from home, reducing emissions from sites, but what about the fact that we were working from home and using our energy at home? And yeah, so we started assessing this since then, because we realized it was a problem. Right, okay, hit the button. Okay, so we got a poll for this. If you want to do the poll, quickly scan the QR code. So does working from home always have lower carbon footprint than working in the office, is what we asked you. And you said sometimes yes and sometimes no. So, and I think you're absolutely right there. Obviously, it depends very much on commuting distances. It would be nice to more accurately get this information, because obviously there are, if we've got different scenarios, say winter and summer, where it makes more sense to go to the office, makes less sense to go into the office, I feel like we could make reductions. Well, companies that have quite significant home working or commuting footprints could make significant reductions here. So it'd be good to see that. Cool, let's have a look at the next question. Where are you based for your work? So it looks like most of you are hybrid, which I think is pretty common after COVID. It would have been nice. It would be nice if we had the data for before COVID as well. But I guess it sort of depends on if you would have had that. It's nice to see that there's, out of the exclusivity people, there's more people who are exclusively in the office, which I think is also somewhat a common thing. There's it's very rare that you'll have a fully home-based company. There's a lot about that in the news, about people not wanting to be exclusively home-based, but then being told that they have to travel halfway across the country 3 times a week. It becomes a bit of a problem. Does your business collect data on home working for its carbon footprint assessment? Some bits, but not all. It's nice to see 7 of you saying yes. I don't know how many of you are people that we work with, but it might be the case. But yeah, some bits, it makes it look like quite a lot of you are assessing it to some degree, and a couple of don't knows. Do you think going into the office at least some days benefits social mental well-being? Absolutely. I think there's quite a good commonality here. Some of you have said maybe, and one of you has said no. Maybe you're a bit of an introvert. No offense. It's not for everyone. I kind of get that. Some people work better on their own. Cool. Is that all the questions? I think so. That's quite interesting to see. I think a lot of people are along the same lines on that. So where are we after COVID? So in February 2023, 40% of people were home working. This has sort of fluctuated between about 30 and 40% since, I guess, the end of COVID. As you can see here, they stopped tracking in February 2023, which is a bit annoying, but at the same time, it was looking like it was on a slight upward trend from 30%. I think people are generally more looking for hybrid working as an option, given that they found out that it is a possibility. Obviously, they changed the wording of the question in February 2022. All they did was remove the words because of COVID. I think a lot of people were realized, oh, this is a permanent thing now. So that's why they did that. Why else is this relevant? So the government just passed a bill which means that people will be able to request hybrid or home working from day one. Yeah, so you could end up with a lot more people requesting it. I know that if I were to move jobs now, I'm not saying I would, Wendy, but if I were to, then it would definitely be something that was high on my agenda. I've also noted here that 80% of people aged 25 plus who can homework do. The reason I've highlighted 25 plus here is under that age, it's a bit dodgy in terms of the statistics, because you've got a lot of hospitality workers and stuff like that where they physically can't work from home there, but it shows that it's what people want again. There isn't a particular GHG protocol category for home working. However, because it relates to commuting, when you do more commuting, you do less home working. When you do more home working, you do less commuting. We quite often assess it within this category. Okay, so that's where we are in terms of assessments. So yeah, I've written here, why is hybrid working an issue? Is it a big problem? We have some companies which we assess the emissions for where they have high levels of commuting. So you've got a company that's mainly in the office here, 21% commuting, and we've got a company here which is 40% home working. So as you can see, it can result in quite a significant portion of a company's emissions, and so therefore we can't just ignore it, because that would be, it would mean that we're missing out on quite a significant portion of emissions. Okay, so what do we need in order to assess the emissions of home working? So we need to survey your staff. Obviously, they're not going to be too forthcoming if you say, hey, can I have your energy bills? So we need to get data which we can then use in order to estimate the emissions from home working and commuting. It's never ever going to be perfect, but this should get what we need from them. Obviously, save time, save money, survey them both at the same time, home working and commuting. So we need items like the working hours and days at home, working days at the office, in case they're a part-time worker and you can't just subtract from 5. Need information on whether they're alone during office hours. So the reason we want that is because if you're at home alone, you might be heating the building for yourself, whereas if you've got other people in the house, it would have already been heated anyway, so therefore it shouldn't come under your company's emissions. Did you heat the home this winter? The reason I mentioned that is because I didn't really heat my flat this winter. I'm in a pretty weird situation though, where the flat is in the middle of a block of flats, so I just end up with everyone else's heating, which is a pretty nice situation to be in. But also, if we put someone as a home alone worker, then we don't want to say that they're heating their house when they're not. The next thing is, what country are they in? So this is just because there's different heating regimes. You might be heating, you might be cooling. In America, I know that it depends on state by state. You could have one state where they heat in the winter and cool in the summer. Other states where they don't have any cooling, other states where they don't have any heating, and so on and so forth. And finally here I've highlighted in green, are you on a green tariff? So this gives you the option to assess market-based emissions for home working. Most people do location-based here. It's the easier one to do. Also, if you're looking at green tariffs, the risk is that you actually increase your home working assessment, just because you then also have to assess the residual mix. But when you're doing this, you just need to make sure that you're doing one or the other and you specify which you're doing. In terms of commuting, we need your mode of transport, vehicle details, carpool details. So that's just, we don't want to be double counting, basically. And finally, we need the distance. If we can't get any of that information, the UK census has quite good data. So if you're a UK company, which most of you should be, well, I don't say should be in that sense, but if you are a UK company, we can use quite good estimates which look at the sector of your employees and the region in which they're working in. And obviously that's based on the biggest survey that ever happens. So that's that would be quite good data. Okay, so we need to assess your electricity consumption somehow. And I've put, unless of course you have a 10-mile extension cable reaching your office. So how are we going to do that? Well, this is going to be pretty much the same for everyone who's doing office work from home. You're going to have a laptop, a screen, probably, maybe two. I've just assumed one in this example. You're going to have some lighting, a kettle, and a microwave, I've said. So you're going to have some hot drinks and probably heat up some food at lunchtime. Otherwise, you would be doing this in the office, which you're not. So therefore, you're doing it at home instead. Anything else that you're doing at lunchtime, watching TV, whatever, I haven't included here because it's not really, I guess, work related. You can do anything in your own time. So how have we calculated this? For most things, we've got the power rating. So I've just used sort of, I guess, my own setup, but assuming that it's similar to what other people's setups are to calculate that. Lighting, you might have lower levels of light than that. Most LED lights are about 5 watts nowadays, but you could have multiple in your room. I've got 5 LED lights in here, so that's about 25 watts. Kettle, so I've just done a little calculation to work out the energy per cup of water that you're going to heat up. And I've worked out that you would use about 25.1 kilowatt hours in a 45-week year. Microwave lunch, 1 meal a day, 1,000-watt input. Don't be confused by the output which is on your microwave. That's not quite the total which is going in. And yeah, so that all just multiplies up using emission factors that we've got. For generation, T&D, and well to tank, and you can get emissions. It's very low, about 0.06 tons of CO2e per year per person. Heating and cooling. This is where things get a little bit complicated because of course there's no real way in which we can physically assess this. So what we've assumed is that by working from home, you're going to increase your gas use by about a quarter if you're in the UK. So what we've got is the average gas kilowatt hours here and the 25% margins there. So this depends on how many people are in the house. So you can divide that by different numbers of inhabitants. Anyway, long story short, if you've got one person in the house, for a 3 to 4 bed, that would be about 0.7 tons of CO2e. 3-4 bed is about the average house size in the UK. If you've got 4 people in that house, you divide it by 4, you get about 0.15 tons of CO2e. Yeah, so this is rounding it up with electricity. This is what you'd get. However, like I said earlier, if you've got a if you've got other people in the house, you'd be heating the building anyway, so your company doesn't care. That doesn't matter. So that's what you've got for heating. What you're now thinking is, but I'm not driving into work. Your home emissions may increase because you're working from home, but you're not driving in. So you're absolutely correct. It depends on how you would get to work, though, and the distance that you're going in. This shows the average distance that people travel by different modes of transport. Annoyingly, again, previously they used census data for this. This particular case, they've done little surveys, which it's the government choosing not to use better data, but that's fine. And yeah, ultimately, if you can bike or walk in, that's the best option. So should you homework or should you commute? Well, it depends a bit. Are you heating? And how far are you traveling? What I've done here is separate the emissions based on whether you're working in winter or summer in the UK. So if you're working in winter, likelihood is you're going to have the heating on. So I've applied the heating emissions over the 6 cold months here, and assuming that you're not going to be heating in summer, which is what most people do. As you can see, it actually makes quite a large impact. So if you tend to drive into work, if you're driving in more than 17 kilometers, then it doesn't make sense to be driving into work from an environmental standpoint. However, in summer, it's less than a kilometer that you'd have to drive in, because obviously the emissions that you're getting from using your electricity at home are really low. However, this, I think, is quite a good thing, linking back to the social side of things that Cara was talking about, because I don't know about many of you, but quite a lot of people they suffer with seasonal affective disorder. So in winter, it actually makes a lot more sense to travel into the office anyway. So it's nice to see things sort of line up from that standpoint there. So overall, how do we calculate emissions? We do it by just taking average data for different scenarios. For employees commuting, we actually use their distances, so that's the more accurate calculation that we've got. If you can work from home less in winter, you would actually reduce your emissions. Whether that's included within the calculation or not, who knows? It's because everything is done by estimate. If the people that are assessing your emissions are dividing it over the whole year, dividing your heating over the whole year, you might not see the benefits of that. However, I think it's something that we should be paying more attention to. I think if we can encourage people to go to the office more in winter and less in summer, then that would potentially reduce emissions. But ultimately, check your distance. How far are you traveling in? If you're going by train, you can go miles and miles and miles, and it makes more sense to do that rather than work from home. Remember that your office is always going to be always going to be open anyway if you've got one. So the site emissions there will just keep going unless we have another COVID. So that's that. Are there any questions, I guess?
Hi, Joel. Thank you. And yeah, there's been quite a lot of chatter in the chat boxes. A lot of people very impressed with your calculations, particularly around how to calculate the energy consumption of making a cup of tea. That was surprisingly complex.
It was, yeah, okay. So it's complex, but at the time when I calculated it 4 years ago, we didn't quite know what the impact was going to be. So we did the calculation anyway, just to make sure.
So with your calculations, and particularly those ones about occupancy of the home and heating, that seemed quite complex. And somebody, I think it's Susie, mentioned there are home working conversion factors in the protocol. Do you think, so your calculation is more comprehensive and presumably based on the data you gather from your staff? Do you think that's better?
So what we did from that, so if we go back to let's go back to this slide. What we did was, so the two lines we got highlighted here, we got the 3 to 4 bed where it was about 0.61, and the 3 to 4 bed with 4 people in where it was about 0.15. Those were the values that we took. Obviously, the second of those values we ignored because they're heating the house for other people. Therefore, it's not relevant to your company. So we have just got the two values, and the home working calcs that they have in GHG protocol were originally taken from I can't remember who published the white paper, but the white paper was pretty much looking at it, pretty much said the same thing as what we've got here. If you've got people alone, then you've got 0.7-ish tons-ish, and if you've got more people, then it's slightly more than that. Within carbon footprint, we do change the electricity values. We've got the heating values that are varied based on which country they're in, because obviously it's all very well looking at it's all very well just applying, this is going to be this number of tons, but it's actually very different in different places.
Okay, thank you. Abby was asking about if people have got their own technologies, solar panels and things installed, how you would incorporate that.
Yeah, so solar panels make it a bit complicated. Obviously, there's not a way that we could ask them if they've got solar, and the likelihood is in summer, again, when you don't need quite so much reductions, it would probably have an effect. But again, the amount of emissions that you're getting from electricity is tiny. It's 0.06 tons per person. Okay, if you've got a lot of those, then it adds up. But for the 1 or 2 people who have the solar, it's probably not gonna have too big of an impact on this calculation. Obviously there's bigger errors we've got here, particularly around the gas usage.
So thank you very much, Joel. And Anna, there you are, you've popped up, you're all ready to grab the screen.
So I'm going to be following on from Joel's presentation and talking about how hybrid working impacts our commute, and particularly around active and sustainable travel. So as Joel said, if we are travelling into work alongside our hybrid working, we need to think about what sort of journeys people are making. So first of all, a little bit of background. So I actually am employed by the walking and cycling charity Sustrans, who aim to make it easier for everyone to walk and cycle. I'm currently on a contract with Winchester City Council as their sustainable travel officer, and I particularly specialise in behaviour change. So I'm looking at helping people in terms of sort of skills and knowledge and confidence move towards active travel and public transport and car share. So I'm not so much focusing on what services is available or what infrastructure or facilities are available, but how people can change their behaviour with what we have at the moment. So in terms of my role at Winchester City Council, I support workplaces to promote sustainable travel, so particularly workplaces within the Winchester district, and that's why I'm here today. I also run sustainable travel initiatives and campaigns with residents, commuters and visitors to the district. I support the transport team on active travel provision, so things like cycle parking or cycle security marking events. And also I promote sustainable travel with the council staff. So obviously we're keen for the council staff to travel sustainably, set a good example. So first, just a few words on hybrid working specifically. The policies at the moment are for Winchester City Council that staff come in at least 50% of their working hours into the office, and that's to encourage good team working, good working sort of cultures and working together and getting ideas off each other. Sustrans setup is slightly different. We're a national company. We've got a lot of people spread all widely across the UK, and many people like myself are implanted within another organisation and often use their offices. So it's less uniformly prescribed. It's more locally determined of whether people go into the office. But just to give you a taster of the type of things that both of those organisations or either of those organisations do to help hybrid working. So they provide equipment, particularly phones, people say mobile phones, making it easier to work from home. We do display screen equipment, self-evaluation for people working at home to make sure that they are working in a comfortable and safe way. The Winchester City Council also run carbon literacy training, and that we find that quite often helps employees' understanding of the potential impact of their own actions on their carbon footprint and on the organisation's carbon footprint, and it leads to participants making pledges to change their behaviour, and often that might be around thinking about how they are energy efficient when working from home or how they are commuting. Sustrans also have a meat-free hour because they're conscious that sometimes, particularly when working from home, that you can have many meetings in a row and it can be quite sort of daunting. So they make sure they put a gap in the middle so that people aren't invisibly sort of having no breaks at home. And also, I think really looking at what Cara said about sort of having social events and within the working day, and really encouraging that sort of bonding that used to happen very well because we were all in the office together all the time. We're now having to make a more concerted effort to make that happen and really to sort of add those social elements into the day. I thought I'd also mention some of the information that can be passed on to your colleagues and staff about how they can make their homes more energy efficient when working from home. So this is the type of information that the council shares in newsletters. So firstly, I find the Energy Savings Trust is good for tips on how to improve the energy efficiency of your home. There's also the Warmer Home scheme, which is giving you fully funded grants to make improvements to your home. So that could be for things like insulation, solar PV panels, heat pumps, that type of thing. There is a cap on the income that you can get for that, which I think from April is going to be less than £36,000 for the household, and you also have to have a certain energy certificate. But it is worth letting your staff know about these types of things because it may be relevant to some, and it may help them make their homes more energy efficient, reduce their carbon footprint, reduce your organisation's carbon footprint when they're working from home. Also, Hampshire County Council previously have offered a Solar Together scheme. It's run for the last few years. I'm not 100% sure it's happening this year, but I'm just putting it out there so that you can keep a lookout. It usually opens up in summer, and it's basically a group buying scheme for solar panels. So residents can express their interest in getting solar panels, provide a little information about their home, and then get a quote, and Hampshire County Council organise the collection of the quotes. They choose a single supplier and obviously vet that supplier, and then the quotes go out to all of the people who entered into the group buying scheme, and they have the option to go ahead with it or not. It's their own choice at that point. So schemes like that can be helpful. Hopefully it will be out in 2024, but we're yet to hear. And also the government's boiler upgrade scheme. So again, that's really offering grants to cover part of the cost if you're changing your fossil fuel boiler over to a heat pump or a biomass boiler. So I think it's worth letting staff know about the type of help they can get and what they can do to make their homes more energy efficient, because it helps them in terms of saving them money, reducing their own carbon footprint, but obviously going back to what Joel said, the calculations of heating our homes, it can reduce the amount of emissions that are going into our organisation's carbon footprint as well. So yeah, really carrying on from what Joel said, want to move really on to looking at particularly employee commuting. So that does feed into our carbon emissions under Scope 3, the indirect emissions, and that's why I'm in the role I am, trying to really reduce the carbon emissions for the Winchester district that come from commuting. And what we see is that travel is often one of the largest contributors to carbon emissions for businesses, including the staff commuting itself. And we sometimes find that employees of a company don't realise that their own commuting is counting towards their company's carbon emissions, and it can be worth making sure that people do know that, and that if they do make a change to active or sustainable travel, that they can be helping you achieve your carbon targets as well. Alongside that, sustainable travel can help improve the staff's mental health and productivity. So there's all sorts of stats available, things like people who travel actively take less sick days and tend to be more productive. So there's lots of benefits from it. And also it can help improve your corporate image and help with recruitment if you're promoting sustainable travel and making it easier for everyone to have those choices. So I just wanted really to talk a bit about the relationship between hybrid working and how people commute, how people travel. As Joel was saying, hybrid working typically means less travel, which can mean lower carbon emissions from transport. But there's some trends that I've seen coming out from the workplace surveys I've seen from across the area, and also conversations I've had with local businesses and their staff that show that hybrid working can change commuting choices. So firstly, hybrid working has some financial implications on commuting. So first of all, if you're hybrid working, you're travelling less often, and therefore the cost of your commuting typically takes up a smaller proportion of your income. So that might mean that people consider modes that previously were a bit expensive, but if they're only doing them once or twice a week, they might switch to that mode. Also, it can mean that season tickets are not available, so train and bus season tickets, or people think they're not available. In some cases there are. So for example, the rail companies offer a flexi season ticket, which allows people to buy a season ticket covering 8 days of travel in 28 days. So if someone's travelling in 2 days a week, they can get a season ticket, which offers them, I think when I tested it out between Winchester and Southampton, it was a discount of around 18% on buying individual tickets. So there are still some season tickets available, but potentially the real or perceived savings for using public transport aren't as good if you aren't travelling every day. Other implications of hybrid working on travel is commuting distances. So what we're starting to see is that people are happy living further away from their workplace because they're only travelling in once or twice a week. This can mean that public transport and active travel can be possibly harder, particularly active travel, because of that long distance involved. And also those long distances can mean that actually the commuting carbon footprint can still be quite high. So a short commute that was happening 5 days a week might be the equivalent carbon footprint to a very long commute that's only happening once or twice a week. And finally, access. So what we're seeing, for example, in Winchester is that the bus level use hasn't increased to the same levels of pre-COVID. And this is because some of the large employers in the area are hybrid working. So there's lower levels of bus use, which can affect the financial viability of those services. So we're seeing a little bit more of a strain on whether those public services and buses can keep being provided if they're not being used as much because of hybrid working. And equally, we see with a lot of organisations that they have less pressure on their car parks. So before hybrid working, before COVID, there were quite a few organisations that were really struggling because their car parks were so full, and that would almost be a deterrent sometimes for people driving to work, because they might struggle to find a car parking space, or they might think about car sharing because of the limited availability. That seems to have gone for some businesses, and they don't have that problem because they only have a smaller proportion of their staff in each day. So all of those implications of hybrid working on travel can influence our commuting travel mode, and they can make car use appear more appealing and most appealing out of the options there. And this can work against what many of us are trying to do in reduce our carbon emissions. So it's actually more important than ever to support our staff to travel sustainably and to help them do that. So that's what I wanted to focus on for the next few minutes, and just run through some of the things that organisations can do to support sustainable travel with their staff. So firstly, I would review the current situation. So Joel very kindly already listed the types of questions that you can go in a staff travel survey. On top of that, I would add questions around what could you do to incentivise people to switch to walking, cycling, trains, buses, car sharing, and that can tell you what actions you need to make. Conduct an audit of your site, look at what facilities you have in terms of cycle parking, showers, lockers, drying areas, car sharing spaces, electric vehicle charging, and have a look at what the gaps might potentially be. And also do an audit of what staff benefits you have. So do you offer season ticket loans or a cycle to work scheme or a salary sacrifice car ownership scheme that would allow people to buy electric vehicles when they otherwise might not be able to afford it. So the first stop is really looking at where are we at the moment, what's the current situation, and this can often form the basis of a workplace travel plan. So look at your current situation, think about what aims and targets you're trying to achieve, and then what measures you can take. So quickly now I'll just run through the measures, some of the measures that you could put in your workplace travel plan to support your staff in moving towards sustainable travel. So a bike doctor, some organisations run these on site, a free bike mechanic coming in and checking over bikes and doing minor repairs. A travel roadshow, so we ran one of these towards the end of last year at Winchester City Council. We had representatives come in from local bus companies. We were promoting the staff benefits that they get, such as the Cycle to Work scheme. We were promoting a local car share app, and also a cycling challenge that was going on at the moment. And it was just an opportunity for people to come along. They got some free food and we talked to them about their travel journeys. Winchester City Council also run their own car share scheme. If you'd like any advice on how to set up your own, please do feel free to get in contact. I'll share my contact details later, and I'll also be talking in a moment about a car sharing app that is available across the Solent region. Also consider whether you'd like to get pool cars or have a pool car club for your organisation. This can mean that your staff don't need to drive in, even if they need to drive for work that day. So it can mean that the commuting carbon emissions are cut out because they've got that available, or even pool bikes. So if you're somewhere where staff are making relatively short journeys that could be switched to bikes, then that can help your carbon emissions as well. And we're also in the process of producing a staff travel information pack for staff at Winchester City Council. So new starters, and indeed all staff, it will be launched with all staff, but particularly new starters get that information on how to travel sustainably into the office. So all the facilities, all the local bus routes, the cycle routes, how to walk from the station, that type of thing, all in one pack. So this is just some photos of the types of events we've been running at the Winchester City Council. So the staff travel roadshow, the bike doctor there on the bottom left. So it's really good to be able to engage with people directly and run in-person events, have those conversations. Beyond that, we can also promote existing ideas or initiatives that are going on. So you can set up walking and bike buddies within your organisation, help people help each other and give each other advice, and also share routes of how to get to the office, a bit like I was talking in the travel information pack. You can promote local led bike rides or bike buses. Often people need to sort of start slowly cycling in their own time and do it for leisure before they would consider it as a cycle commute. So I've put British Cycling Let's Ride there. They run local free bike rides across the Hampshire area. And also promoting things like the £2 bus fare cap, making sure your staff know about that, reminding them that it's there, encouraging them to try bus travel. Within Winchester City Council, we also run a workplace travel network for local organisations. We've been meeting quarterly, mostly online, and the aim is really to share travel updates from the council and other partners, but also for workplaces to share their learnings and case studies on what's worked for their own workplaces in terms of promoting sustainable travel and talking about the challenges you come up against. So I've put my contact details there. If you'd like to know more about the network or in fact anything else today, please do feel free to get in touch. Just lastly, I wanted to talk about the My Journey Workplaces team. So they are actually based at Southampton City Council, and they cover the region shown in red on the map here, so along the M3 corridor and the M27 corridors. And they also offer support to workplaces around travel and workplace travel. So they might be relevant to other organisations here. They run and pay for a Love to Ride cycling challenge, which local businesses can take part in. It's all already set up and really easy to take part in. They provide promotion materials, so you can just send them out to your staff and encourage them to get out on their bikes. It's a bit of fun competition. They also have a app that is designed to allow you to plan, book and pay for all your sustainable travel journeys in one place. So you can look at how I get from A to B, and it will say how what train journeys are available, how much they cost, same for bus, same for cycling, and looking at things like even ferries as we go on, and the hire scooters and bikes that are in Southampton and Portsmouth. And then also there is a car sharing app that comes from My Journey. Your organisation would need to register with My Journey to take part in this, but there's already 21 workplaces across the Solent area using it, and the app matches your staff with potential car sharers, either just within your organisation if you prefer, or with other organisations in the area. It's your choice of whether you do it internally or broader. Staff are incentivised by prizes that are paid for by My Journey, and there's options for you to add in a guaranteed ride home for your staff and priority parking for car sharers. So again, if you want to know more, do get in touch with me and I can put you in touch with the My Journey team. Dates for your diary. I just thought I'd put in some dates that are around sustainable travel for the coming months. It's really good to tie in any promotions with under these umbrella themes. Sorry, the 22nd of April, I'm trying to think what that might be. Something's gone wrong with my slide there. But yeah, there's definitely something happening on the 22nd of April. And that's it. I will stop sharing my screen.
Thanks, Anna. I think 22nd of April is Earth Day.
Thank you. Yes, I was just done something wrong with my slide there. Thank you.
That's all right. Really interesting. Thank you. Whole bit about unintended consequences and travel choices. It's something that comes up in sustainability so many times. You do one good thing here and something weird happens that you weren't expecting over there. And so, yeah, people are so difficult to work with. I don't know. So just while we're waiting for some questions, if anyone's got any, you mentioned things like sort of loans for season tickets, and this might be a question for all of our speakers actually, whether any businesses do the same thing for people who want, to insulate their homes better because they're at home more than they used to be, or they want some solar panels. Do you know of any organisations that will help you? They help their own staff to fund those things through, loans or access to finance and that sort of stuff.
I'm not aware of any yet, but I think it's a lovely idea. Yeah, no, it's not something I've heard others talking about. I think what I'm quite keen to do is encourage businesses to not only for public transport, but do similar support for active travel. So I think sometimes businesses are offering things like free parking and public transport loans, but sometimes active travel is the gap where there's not the incentive or the financial support as much to help with active travel. Yeah. But yeah, no.
Interesting to know if you could get an air source heat pump on a salary sacrifice scheme.
Yeah,
that would save you a bit. Wendy, hi.
Going to echo that point exactly. You just took the words out of my mouth. If only we could have salary sacrifice in the same way that we do, and obviously that makes the EVs very super economic from the benefit in kind position, wouldn't it be great to have that for things that we do to our homes? Bit of lobbying maybe to do there.
Absolutely, yeah, we'll work on that one. Should be easy. I was interested, you talked about provision of kit to help people work at home with laptops and stuff. I think you mentioned phones. I think that's really important. So a lot of our staff, they all started using their own mobile phones during COVID and things, but then it's really difficult to turn off. So that provision of, that kit, so you can then turn it off at the end of the day, I think is really important.
Yeah, we had exactly that conversation this week, and I think it does vary with people what their preference is within Sustrans. Some people prefer to use their own phones, find it easier. I prefer having a separate one for that reason, that you can choose when you do and don't get messages.
Yeah. Okay, doesn't look like we've got any more questions from the audience. Wendy, did you want to pop your slide back up that you wanted to share?
I've got something that's been emailed across.
Oh, right, okay.
Want to stay anonymous. We're talking about the environmental and social impact of working from home and hybrid. The other pillar, of course, of sustainability being the economic one, and the effects of our neighbours, hospitality, cafes, shops, etc., when we do have so much working from home. So really squaring things up there. I'll put that to the panel.
I mean, we've heard a lot of this in the news recently about, particularly in London, with your coffee shops and things that are really struggling because the people aren't, they're not going out for lunch, they're not grabbing the coffee on the way to work. And to a certain extent, there's not a lot you can do about those businesses in those locations. But all of those people are still drinking coffee and they're still having lunch and they're still meeting people. They're just doing it somewhere else. So it may be that there's just there's a relocation that needs to happen for those kinds of businesses, and that if people are getting together with their co-workers, maybe they're doing it outside of the office. If you've got a group of people working in the same space and they all get up together in the Costa down the road instead of the Costa in a different city. So I think, there's a relocation, not necessarily a disappearing of businesses.
There is something just with International Women's Day having just gone that Ridge did within all 11 of our offices, and that's something we're aware nationally we're quite disparate. So we sought to find local women-owned businesses in each of the areas and then used that as a way to advertise to the people in the local offices, hey, you've got this great bakery and their cakes are great. So I think there are ways that we can support it. It's something certainly we're very aware of, because we do still operate within these areas. Even if we've got fewer people coming to the office or they're coming to the office less frequently, we still inhabit that space and have a responsibility to support that area.
And I think also encouraging those informal team times really, and perhaps using local establishments for those, because we're seeing each other less in person in the office, that we need to really make use of those times being together. And although increasingly offices are becoming really well equipped for sort of group gatherings, really having a change of scene and moving somewhere else kind of adds a nice dynamic. And we're lucky in Winchester, we've got quite a few sort of local independent places within a short walk of the office, which makes that really feasible.
I think I have seen in one or two outlets, I wouldn't say they're particularly the nationals, incentives on the quieter days, the Mondays and the Fridays for, a cut price cappuccino, etc. So maybe it's, a bit of demand management on hospitality side and just changing to our changing situations, really.
Yeah.
I think that it gives people the option to help their local shops open.
So Joel, you're really quiet for some reason.
That's up here. I was just going to say, it gives people the opportunity to help keep their local shops open, which, I mean, I've lived in towns where the shops just gradually shut, and to be honest, I'd much rather have those shops around where I live than around the office. But that's my thought on that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And just an important comment from Susie about home working, supporting working families and particularly working women, and just providing those opportunities to get back into the corporate world at a level you wouldn't necessarily be able to do if you were having to leave work early to go and pick up kids. And I know we've got a lot of very busy women at work who they arrive a bit late and they leave early to go and pick up the kids, but they're still doing the same amount of work, but in shorter hours. And they're all manic. And so, doing that work from home just means you can achieve more at a slightly less intense pace, depending on what the children are doing at the time.
I think hybrid working needs to be flexible, really, to suit different people. Because I was thinking while Joel was making his comment about is it better being in the office or not. I'm lucky in that I'm quite close, so I walk. So for me, a lot of the time, particularly in winter, I have been in the office quite a bit. In summer, I may be at home a bit more, but also I live alone. So if I am here, I'm heating the house, but I've also got a bit of that social isolation we were talking earlier. So for me, going into the office is actually very attractive. But I work with quite a few people that the practicalities of their routine and their day means that working from home, certainly quite a few days in the week, just makes everything flow better. So I think we've got to recognise that different people, different stages of their journey, different living situations are going to want to sway a little bit more one way or the other, and it's good to be able to accommodate that.
Yeah,
I think it gives people the opportunity to live where they want to live as well, which I think before COVID, I moved down to Basingstoke, and I decided that I would, after COVID had hit, I decided, I actually want to sort of experience more places. So it kind of gives you the opportunity to do that. I think it's great for people's lives. We talk about well-being. People need to see other people. People need to go to the office, but it also lets people live their life more, which I think is a beautiful thing.
Yeah, I also wanted to come in and say I think we talk a lot, this is about hybrid working, but I think it's become quite clear to me throughout this session that we can't talk about hybrid working and flexible working as distinct things. They have to be understood together in terms of reacting to the need that people have and the benefits of all sides of how we can work.
Yeah, absolutely. And just a point there in the chat about maybe saving money on the very expensive copies is not a bad thing for a lot of people. Right. Well, I think if we've got no more questions, I think we'll call it a wrap there. Wendy, you were going to share the feedback form once again before everyone goes. So if you haven't already grabbed hold of that form to fill in, then do that now. And I'd just like to say thank you very much for coming, and thank you to our speakers. That's been really interesting and quite enjoyable from my point of view. And hopefully we will see you again for the next one.